Hi, this is the observationist here. Today we're going to be talking about tariffs, and we're going to be talking about supply chains, and going to be talking about what do manufacturing companies do with the current situation that they're faced with, and why are they doing it? And so let's go into that a little bit. What's going on? These are headlines you're seeing now for GM, Ford, Deere. Why are they all leaving? And also you can look at Caterpillar and other companies as well, Toyota. They're reducing, moving, shutting down production. Why? Why would they do that? The whole purpose of tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Why isn't it having that immediate impact? Well, let's look at that a little bit. This is what a supply chain once upon a time looked like. They didn't call it supply chain. They just called it a manufacturer and his suppliers. And it would look like this. A manufacturer and a few suppliers. Half a dozen, maybe a few more, but not a lot of suppliers. And the reason why is that in those days, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, going into the 70s, the idea was the company makes much of its production internally. Vertical integration was the key. That was what they're trying to do. The best example of that is Ford. Ford company was the most vertically integrated company that I think ever existed. They had the largest steel plant in the world, Rouge Steel. That was the largest steel plant in the world, owned by Ford, not U.S. Steel. None of the other large steel companies. Ford. And they used up all of their own steel production. So they had the iron ore coming out from Michigan, going into the Rouge Steel plant, and so in goes raw materials, and out was coming cars. They were the classic vertically integrated company. They did their own electronics, their own radios, and they did about everything. The only thing they didn't do is tires and glass. It's like you have Goodrich and Goodyear were in the neighborhood, and PPG they had a glass company right there in the suburbs of Detroit. But everything else pretty much was right there in Ford. But that began to change with the advent of the Bretton Woods system, whereby there'd be low tariffs around the world. The idea was globalization, and so companies started outsourcing those things that other companies could do better, more cheaply. So like now, when you buy a car, guess what? The seats are not made by that company. The seats are made by another company that specializes in car seats, and the same with much of the car. So that was then. They also had other impacts. Companies and suppliers and shippers made their own decisions. They were independent of each other. Minimal communication was going on between them. That created high inventory costs because there'd be inventories all along the way, and that interrupted production. That would actually also create what were called inventory recessions in those days. And an inventory recession would come roughly about every 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Then we move forward, and let's say to the supply chain era, and this is when it really started rolling out. This is when companies really started putting production overseas or parts of their production overseas, so a supply chain for a company looked more like this. And there's also where we started calling them supply chains, not just a company and its suppliers. And this is why the suppliers started going much deeper, not just shallow like this, 2 or 3 levels deep. Now, supply chains might go 10, 15 levels deep, become very long. And domestic production, the domestic side of that production became much less. Foreign production became much more. And you can think of each of these lines being different countries. So a company making a car in Detroit, for instance, maybe final assembly now is done in the Detroit area, but there's things coming in from Canada, maybe stuff from Mexico, maybe a differential is coming from Brazil, maybe a gearbox is coming from Italy. Stuff was coming from all over the world. And so supply chains became very deep, very complex. But also nothing was going on. Companies, suppliers, and shippers all began to coordinate, communicate much more intimately because they're trying to cut out inventories along the way. They're trying to tighten their relationships. So even though these things are in separate areas, separate states, maybe separate countries, they wanted production to come to the next stage just in time. So there's no inventories. And you may have heard that term before, just in time. But that outsourcing had exploded during that time. So what happened was one went from a few suppliers now into hundreds of suppliers, all coordinating together to maximize efficiency. Just in time is the mantra. Lower inventories, eliminate inventory recessions. So since the 1980s, we really haven't had the inventory recessions we used to have in the 60s. We don't have it. We have recessions for other reasons, mind you, but not inventory recessions. Now let's go back here. Let's go back to the era where, if you go back to the era of the 1930s, there were tariffs, fairly high tariffs. And by the way, we're going to have another video on the tariffs specifically, the history of them, and their impact on both the Great Depression of the 1930s as well as the Great Recession of the 1893, and what that meant politically. And so we're going to go into that in another video, not this one. But what's going on here, if a tariff is imposed, then it's a bit easy for a company to bring the production of these suppliers into the country, bring it domestically. It's not that big of a deal. It's only a few nodes on this hub of activity. But if we go down to the modern era, where it's more like this, now what happens? Let's say you're Ford and you have your production facility, which is most likely more of a final assembly facility here in the United States. You got a few local suppliers doing some things. Maybe some body stamping is done in one location. Maybe transmission is gotten domestically, something like that. But there's all these other things coming in from other countries, and not just from Canada, not just from Mexico, but like I said, from Europe, Africa, Far East, all over. So now you get this tariff wall. What to do? What to do about that? Well, you can't leave it as it is because that tariff wall will kill you. So one option is to do what was done up here, and that is bring the outside nodes, the ones that are outside of the country, inside the country. Okay, but now you look what's going on. You got dozens, maybe hundreds of nodes out here. That, way too many to try and bring back into the country, especially on short notice. But you only have a few nodes inside the country, inside the United States. It's actually easier to shut these down, move these activities outside the United States to Canada, to Mexico, to some other place, to Thailand. That's what Harley Davidson's doing with some of its stuff. It's easier to do that. So the tariffs that Trump is doing, especially when he's doing it in such an immediate way, he's not easing them in so that companies can have years to prepare for it. No, he's doing it like right now, next Monday kind of a thing. And that is a death knell to a manufacturer. They can't operate like that. And so this is going to have a serious damaging effect on the United States manufacturing and on the United States economy. This is going to impact these companies for a long time. And because they're going to have to make decisions now that in the long run may not be the best ones for them to make, but they have to make decisions now. And whatever decision they make, they have to live with those decisions for years. Because when you decide to build a plant someplace or to buy from a certain place, You cannot just switch it on and off like a light bulb. And that's a problem that the United States manufacturer is going to have. And Trump, by saying one day, tariffs are 145%, the next day they're 30%, the next day maybe they're 10%, maybe the next day after that they're 45%. They go up and down, and you don't know what the hell Trump's going to do next. People can't effectively manage their companies in that kind of an environment. So that's going to really damage American manufacturing. Foreign manufacturers are going to have a much easier time of it. So that means all of our foreign competitors are going to have an easier time watching us beat ourselves up. And it's sad, but it's not going to go well for the United States, in my opinion. Anyway, on that cheery note, I think I'll say goodbye. If you liked what I said, if you liked some of the things or if you didn't like it, but you liked the analysis, please like and subscribe maybe. And I'll be back with some more. Like I said, I'm going to be giving another video on tariffs and their history in the United States and why they went down in importance and what their impact was during the Great Depression. And what their impact is likely going to be today. So anyway, with that, I'll say goodbye and see you later. Bye-bye.